Premier of New Brunswick was on Parliament Hill today to meet with the Prime Minister. It's the first meeting between the two leaders since Blaine Higgs announced last week he was cancelling New Brunswick's plan to host the Francophonie Games in 2021, pointing to spiking costs and not enough federal funding. And Premier Higgs and the Prime Minister at odds over other issues as well, perhaps chief among them the carbon tax. And how did the meeting go today? Well, let's find out. Blaine Higgs, the Premier of New Brunswick, is with me. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming to speak with me. This is your first face-to-face meeting with the Prime Minister since you became Premier.
It is my first one-to-one.
Yep.
We had a First Minister's meeting back a month ago, but this is my first one-on-one. Yes.
How did it go?
It was very interesting. It was a good discussion on a lot of items. You know, we got right into carbon tax as an initial opener.
How did that go?
Well, the recognition was there, certainly, that I kind of inherited something that wasn't suitable for the federal plan. And I was kind of left to deal with it, so they certainly indicated that, which was, I guess, a good way to start. But the discussion around...
Sorry, what do you mean by you? So, I mean, obviously you took over and New Brunswick had a plan the feds, you know, weren't happy with, right? And
apparently, you know, they said that long for quite a while, that it wasn't going to work.
Right.
And they knew that, and I would guess my predecessor knew it as well, but I didn't. So when I got into government, we realized that the plan wasn't acceptable. But I never did agree with the carbon tax. I never did agree with the levy. I agreed that we have to meet our missions, and our goal is to do that, and we're well on track. And in fact, we're just about there for 2030.
So do you mean did you make the pitch that, look, my government will go back and rewrite a plan? We'll rewrite
No, we basically have put a plan forward, and we're following a climate action strategy that was put together by departments over the last couple of years within our government. Mm-hmm. And so I was saying we have a plan. My concern was twofold. One was that the very thing that they've accepted with other provinces, in terms of industry, and they aren't prepared to accept for New Brunswick. They're just going to oppose the federal backstop. And
what does that mean? So everybody
well,
understands.
It means that in the case of recognizing, you know, the different industries and the current condition they're in, and how they would be treated in terms of a tax base, is different in each province. Mm-hmm. Some have exemptions. I mean, if I use an example, and it's because of an industry I'm familiar with, the refinery in St. John, if it was in Newfoundland or if it was in Saskatchewan even, it would have tax credits, because it spent a lot of money in terms of environmental improvements. But that's not the case in New Brunswick. It's going to be penalized in this process. So that by itself is just a fairness issue, because export is a big part of New Brunswick, and 90% of what comes out of our industry goes to the U.S. in many ways. So that's a concern. We're not being treated competitively with other provinces and against the people we actually sell to. Yeah. The other's the levy. Against the carbon tax levy, I asked if it would be delayed until the court hearing was finished. I'm an intervener with Saskatchewan and Ontario, and I wanted to have a stay on that until the court ruling.
What did he say about that?
No. So
did he tell you why?
Well, basically they didn't agree with the court challenge and didn't believe it'd be successful, and therefore they weren't willing to recognize it as an issue.
If it turns out, so I guess what if the carbon tax kicks in, the federal carbon tax kicks in, and as promised by the federal government, people in New Brunswick get rebates that are larger than what they're paying out in a new carbon levy? Will you agree with it then?
Well, a rebate check that comes in just prior to the next election, which is kind of convenient. But I guess when I look at it, I ask the question, okay, how much revenue is going to come in through all this versus how much you're going to spend out? And other than the statement that, well, every citizen will get more than the average citizen, well, they'll get more than they actually spend. And the average citizen, we don't believe will get more than the average spend, because it's not just about what you pay for fuel at the gas pump. It's a lot of downloads that come from other commodity costs. Okay, so when you ask the question, you're saying when you ask the question to the Prime Minister, how much, presumably it's in the billions, how much money is coming in versus how much money will be going out, he didn't give you a dollar figure. Not in the whole He just said, he said individually, there'll be 202 paid by an individual and 248 they'll get a rebate. But in terms of the bigger province and what's coming in, versus what's going out, no. I was told I would get that information, but I do not have it. Okay, but the bottom line for the Prime Minister was people in New Brunswick with a carbon tax imposed by the federal government will have more money in their pockets, not less. Well, and you don't believe that? I don't believe that. No, I don't. I think there's a lot of hidden costs that come out of that the people are going to see, and they'll feel it in many ways. You're talking about the need to develop more of New Brunswick's natural gas reserves. How
would that affect your efforts to cut emissions? If you say you've got a plan to bring down emissions and you don't need a carbon levy, and yet you want to develop more fossil fuel resources. Now, granted, natural gas produces less emissions than coal or oil, but it still produces emissions. So what does that do to a plan to reduce emissions?
Well, very good point, because in the relation of other provinces and the comparators, because what I see is exemption in other provinces. I see an exemption in Quebec on a lime plant. And I see exemptions, in BC on an LNG export facility with the shale gas development supporting that, because it's a global benefit. And we could do the very same thing in terms of an LNG export in New Brunswick. So what I was asking for is fairness across the board. And what I see is a lot of different components that are individually made up through different provinces, who each obviously looked after their own interests. And I haven't had an opportunity to do that in that same way, because of my short tenure.
Right.
And I'm saying we're being unfairly leveraged here right now at this point in time, and New Brunswick is unique with other provinces in this situation.
Okay, a couple of minutes left here to, you talked about softwood lumber and concerns about that. What are your concerns?
Well, the concerns is 50% of our businesses are paying 20% an export duty. And my concern is that these businesses are not going to survive when the market actually goes down, or the change in US dollar, Canadian dollar exchange rate. And so there's a sense of urgency here, because these are businesses throughout the province that will close. So we need a deal. We need a deal with the U.S. to get that levy back down to where it was. Obviously, full exemption is what we're targeting, but we have half of our business there are at 9%. So certainly we must be able to get a fairness model there with all businesses. And there's no, it's been going on now for 3 years. We need a decision before the business is closed, not after.
Finish on this. Did you get a chance to discuss the fishery with the Prime Minister? Because I know New Brunswick's making the pitch that, look, the federal government hasn't managed the salmon fishery very well. We think the New Brunswick government, and I believe along with Indigenous groups in the province, you can do a better job. How did that message go?
And we do believe that. Now, I didn't get any real, decision in relation to that would happen, but there was a acknowledgement that we should base our decisions on science. And I said, I'm all over that. I agree with that. But I have DFO in Halifax saying one thing and allowing the restocking program in the Bay of Fundy rivers. And then I have the DFO in Moncton saying that you can't do this in the rivers in the Miramichi area. So I would just like consistency, because science should build consistency. So we agreed it should be based on science, and that would be a follow-up to review that.
Promising to balance the books in New Brunswick this year, even though the last government projected a deficit of $130 million. You've promised not to raise taxes. What are you going to cut?
Well, there's $1 billion of new spending that the province has and new taxes that have already been levied on the people in the province over the last 4 years. And that's over 10% of our budget. So when I look at all that, and I can't find where the value is being generated from all that expense. So I'm quite comfortable that we've taxed people enough. We just haven't got value for that. So there's things we're doing that we don't need to spend money on. And that's our focus.
Are you in a position to roll some of those taxes back?
Not right yet, but that would be my goal. Right now, my focus is not to get a downgrade from the credit rating agencies, because that's my concern. We got a negative outlook last year. That's usually a signal to a downgrade. And I'm very focused on that not happening, thus paying more interest.
New Brunswick Premier Blaine Higgs, good to talk to you. Thanks for coming in.
Nice to talk to you as well. Thank you.